We're now going to turn to Israelite sacred symbols, which are basically focusing on the temple and some of the symbolic meaning of the temple for the ancient Israelites. We're going to begin with an examination of the preparations to build the temple. Now, in the Bible, David is called a man of blood and a man of war. And for that reason, the Lord refuses to allow him to build the temple. Solomon's name is Shlomo in Hebrew, which means his peace. He is a man of peace, and so he gets to build the temple. So David, the man of war and blood, can't. And that's partly David's murder of Uriah, but, that's another story. Now, what happens is David wants to have a census. And I've given you the passages here. What's the problem with a census? Why does he want a census? Wants to know how many soldiers he has, how many people, men of military age that can fight. What else?
Taxes.
He wants taxes. He wants to know how many taxes he can collect. So, for those two reasons, he takes a census. The problem with that is that the Lord says you must rely on the Lord and not on the arm of flesh. And if you take a census, it shows a lack of faith in the Lord because you're trying to find out how many soldiers you have. So there's a theophany that occurs on the top of the Temple Mount. An angel appears, and an angel in the Old Testament doesn't mean, it's not a class of beings. What does angel mean in the Old Testament? In fact, in the New Testament as well. Angelos, what does that mean? It means messenger. So that's why it doesn't mean a type of being. Forget that. Messenger is what it means. And the same in Hebrew, it's melech. It means the guy who has a message, a messenger. So it can be a human being. It can be a celestial being. It can be God himself can be the messenger. He can bring the message, right? So anyway, the messenger appears and basically curses David. And David has to choose one of three things that will happen to Israel because of this lack of faith. And when that occurs, David builds an altar on the spot where this angel appears. It is the threshing floor of Araunah. And Araunah is a guy's name, right? And he's a Jebusite, and he has a threshing floor up there. That is a place where they prepare, they winnow the grain to get the grains out from the stalk. And they'd flip it in the air, and the wind would blow the stalks and the stubble away. So he buys that from Araunah and builds an altar there. So before the temple was built, David builds an altar on the top of the mountain where this old Jebusite Canaanite had his threshing floor. And then he says, it's going to be the place of the house of the Lord. The name Yahweh is often spelled YHWH because nobody knows for sure what the vowels are. So when you see that, it just means the Lord. Okay? So David wants to build the temple there and starts to make preparations. However, he can't. He's not permitted to build the temple. So if you look at the map here, this shows you the city of David, and all of this is based on archaeology of where the walls were. And there's not a lot of archaeology here, but there's some, and we kind of know how the walls were. But this threshing floor was up here. Why was it up there instead of somewhere else? Yeah?
Because to thresh you wanted a good wind flow.
Exactly. So you put it up high, the wind blows hard, and you can thresh better because it blows the stubble away. And the grains are too heavy, they don't blow away. So, these places were always tend to be on a place where there's lots of wind, and on top of a hill was often that way. Now, as David organizes things, he organizes the descendants of Aaron. Now notice, there's two different classes here or actually three classes here that we sometimes conflate. There's Levites, there are Aaronites or Aaronids, and then there are Zadokites who are descendants of Zadok. Now, Aaron was the first high priest, and all of his descendants are called in the Bible Cohens, which means priests. These guys are always called Levites, and that includes everybody. And then only the descendants of one line through Zadok, one of Aaron's descendants, they're the only guys that can be high priests. So if you're a Zadokite, you're at the high priestly family. If you're an Aaronite, you're a priest. But if you're a Levite, you're a lesser priest. It's like a ranks or orders in the priesthood. Okay? So we just got to bear that in mind. It's not always clear. But David organizes the Levites here, and their duty is to assist the Aaronites, the descendants of Aaron, who are the priests, not the Levites. And they have care for the courts, the chambers. They clean everything. They do kind of the general labor. But they take care of the temple. They protect the temple. They clean it. They repair it. They do all that type of stuff. But they're not directly involved in the sacrifices. Only the Cohens or the Aaronites, descendants of Aaron, can do the sacrifice. And then only the descendants of Zadok can do the high priestly functions. Does that make sense to everyone? So it's just kind of a distinction that's in the Old Testament that's not always clear to us. Now, they are also to stand, these are the Levites again, they're to stand every morning thanking and praising the Lord. Likewise at evening. Morning and evening were the time of the two sacrifices. So they assist in all the preparations for the sacrifices, and they sing hymns while the sacrifices are being done. So the Levites formed a choir. They played music and they sang songs. I mean, there's a whole bunch of these Levites, right? So they're doing lots of different functions. But they were the choir that were singing during the sacrifices. Okay? Then, they also sing, they sing in the morning and evening sacrifices and whenever burnt offerings. So Sabbaths, new moons, and appointed festivals. So so singing is a big part of their function. Now these Levites were divided into 24 courses or divisions. All right? And they rotated service in the temple because there were too many of them, and you didn't need them all at once. They all wanted to do it, but you didn't need them all at once. So what you did is divide them into 24 groups. And each year, one group got to serve twice. Right? Actually it'd be more than that because there's only 48 and there's 52 weeks. So, but the cycle was every 24, they'd serve in a row for 24 times, then you'd go back and get to serve again. So twice a year, basically, they would serve for a week or so. Does that make sense? So that's the way they organized the Levites. And they were also treasurers and officials in terms of just running the day-to-day operations. They were gatekeepers. And notice the gates were set up. There was an east gate and a west gate and all these different gates. And each family got kind of assigned to be the gate. So the family of Shelemiah controlled the east gate. And they cast lots to do this. This is an important thing to remember. Casting lots. And then Zechariah got the north gate, his family. So from then on, his descendants were guardians of the north gate. So they actually formed kind of a Levitical guard, priest, like the police force. And they had weapons and they just protected the gate, make sure, nothing went wrong or somebody caused a problem. And when Jesus is arrested in Gethsemane, it says they brought the guard with him. That these are the Levite guard that the high priest had. These are, armed soldiers. Now David got to plan the temple out, and it's interesting how he did the plan. The plan is tabnit, and this means actually, kind of a type or a model, something along those lines. And he organized the entire plan. We won't read through the whole thing, but all of this was written from the Lord's hand. And he made it clear to me the plan of all the works, this tabnit. So notice, the Lord wrote out the plan for the temple, gave it to David, and David gave it to his son. Now, this could be read or understood in two different ways. One is the Lord personally wrote it all down, which is unlikely. It's probably that a prophet received a revelation and wrote it down, wrote down the words of the Lord, but it was the Lord's words, so they say the Lord came from the Lord's hand. Probably it's the latter. But at any rate, this is all revealed. The structure of the temple is supposed to be is revealed from God. And he also prepared all sorts of gifts and treasure for the temple. So David is doing all sorts of stuff to prepare for the construction of Solomon's temple. But he's not allowed to actually build it. Now, after this, Solomon is crowned king while David's still alive. Why? Because there's a succession crisis. What's the problem with Solomon? He's David's youngest son, and he is the daughter of Bathsheba, who seems to be a Hittite, right? She's married to Uriah the Hittite. Maybe she's an Israelite. It's not quite clear. So she may not be an Israelite. But he's the youngest son. Who's supposed to get the throne? Well, the older sons. And in fact, Absalom, one of the older sons, rebels because he wants the throne, right? He's worried that somebody else is going to get it. So David had lots of sons, and there was a succession crisis. So while David was still alive, they crowned Solomon, so that the succession would be clear. They take him down to the Gihon, which is that spring, and they crown him at the spring at the base of the mountain here. And who is the guy that does it? The priest Zadok, that's this guy. He's this descendant of Aaron, but it's one particular line, the eldest son line, that gets the high priesthood. And then the prophet Nathan, and Benaiah is the guard, the commander of the army. Okay, so these three figures all go down and crown Solomon at the Gihon. Remember, the Gihon is one of the rivers of Eden, so it is the sacred spring at the base of the temple that is associated with the Edenic paradisical waters. And David does this while he's still alive to ensure the succession to his son. Now, Solomon's name is in Hebrew is Shlomo, and his brother is named Absalom, Shalom, which is the father of peace. Shlomo is his peace in Hebrew. Notice they're both named peace names. I mean, this is kind of a tradition with David that now I have conquered everything, now we're going to have peace, and my children will be the father of peace and the peace of God and different things like that. So the Gihon Springs right down here. So the temple is going to be built up here. The Gihon's right at the base of the valley, and that's where Solomon was crowned. Why did they go to the Gihon? Because those are the sacred waters flowing from the base of the temple, and so he needed to do a purification ritual where his body is washed and purified and then anointed for kingship and then dressed in the royal robes. There was a whole coronation ritual, and they wanted to use this holy water from the spring to do that. Before he builds the temple, Solomon does a very interesting thing, and that is they sacrifice at high places. Now, this is bima in Hebrew, and it means a elevated or a raised place. What's the problem with high places? Well, later on they say you can't sacrifice on high places because that's where the Canaanites sacrifice. But at this time, before the temple was built, they were doing it. They'd go on the top of a hill, they'd build an altar, and they'd just offer sacrifices there. So this is what Solomon does. He goes to Gibeon, which is a place near Jerusalem about 8 miles to the northwest. He goes up to the high place. The house of the Lord had not been built. He sacrificed and offered incense at the high place. And the principal high place, it means the great high place, this is the most important one, was at Gibeon. And he offered 1,000 burnt offerings on the altar at Gibeon. Now he does this before the temple is built. Why? Because you got to offer sacrifices to the Lord even if there's no temple, right? Did they have the tabernacle at that time? It's not clear. They were keeping the Ark of the Covenant in a house of a private house near Gibeon. It's not exactly at Gibeon, but it's nearby. It's another hill, a couple hills over. But the tabernacle is made out of what? It's made out of cloth, and it's almost 250 years old by now. What type of shape would it be in? It's wearing out. It's not going to be working well. So Solomon is offering sacrifices at this high place, and in this offering, he describes what the purpose of the temple is as he makes this prayer to the Lord. He's going to build a house for the name of the Lord, that is, for God's name or God's presence to reside. To offer fragrant incense. Now notice, that's the most important thing. We tend to think of the blood sacrifice as the most important. The Israelites said the incense sacrifice is the most important because it's done inside, right by the Holy of Holies, and it's done by the elite priests. So offering incense is much more important than offering blood. So they offer incense. Then what do? They offer the rows of bread. So there's bread and wine that they offer, and that again is in the temple, not outside the temple. And then the third most important is the burnt offerings morning and evening. And then also on Sabbaths, new moons, and appointed festivals. So notice, in the Israelite sacrificial order has 4 different layers. The morning and evening are the daily sacrifices. You offer one at sunrise and one at sunset. That's the morning and evening ones. The Sabbath is every 7 days. On the Sabbath, you do the same morning and evening sacrifice, but you double it, because it's more holy than the other days. Then the new moons is the monthly sacrifice. And then the appointed festivals are annual sacrifices 3 times. So there's daily, weekly, monthly, and annual sacrifices. There's a whole calendrical system which is reflected in this passage here. So the purpose of the temple is a place to make offerings to the Lord. And there's a whole complicated set of what offerings you have to make.